what's going to happen today is we're going to get a whole bunch of people being born. There's going to be 12, well, actually 11 boys born today. The other boy will be a little bit later. But, and a girl's going to be born. But, of course, in the Old Testament, girls don't count. But this is a tough crowd. But actually, it's true. Girls don't count. You only counted men and boys 13 and over. So just like when Jesus feeds the 5,000, they're talking about 5,000 men and boys that are 13 and older. So there might have been more like 15,000 or 20,000 people there when you count women and girls and younger boys. So you always have to keep in mind as we go through this, the main promises that God makes with Abraham, which are descendants, the land, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed by you, or through you, is a better translation. So again, here's this old guy living in current day Iraq. God calls him, says, all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed by you. Now that seems pretty unlikely. You know, if God called you today and said, all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed through you, you'd say, I don't think that's possible. And Abraham probably said, I don't think that's possible. But we see how this happens because he has Messiah, Jesus, Yeshua, as his descendant, who then we are blessed as nations of the earth, families of the earth. We're blessed because of him. And so because of Abraham, that, you know, through Abraham, that promise comes true. And like I always like to say, here we are, you know, the year 2021 in Ohio, still talking about Abraham. He couldn't have even imagined such a thing. I mean, nobody's going to probably talk about any of us, you know, 10 years after we're dead, let alone for 3,500 years. So it's always good to keep the promises in mind, but as we see, he gets promised, he's in the land. Okay, he says, God says, this is your land. You're going to have so many descendants, you're not going to be able to count them. Well, then he gets renamed Abraham, father of nations. So he's going to be the father of nations, but so far, he's got Isaac as his, you know, I guess we'd call legitimate son, and then Ishmael as kind of the son who's not the son of promise. So at best, he's got two descendants. And then last time we got Jacob and Esau born. So far, he's got the first two guys and the second two, you know, he's got four descendants at best. So that's not more descendants than you can count in the stars or on the seashore. But if you look today, Abraham's the father of about 150 million Arabs in the world and about 14 or 15,000 Jews in the world. I mean 14 or 15 million Jews in the world. And of course, we, even though we're Gentiles, we can look at Abraham as our spiritual father because the whole plan of salvation kind of unfolds from there. And the other thing to keep in mind is, why does God need a chosen people? Well, he needs a chosen people because he reveals himself to this group of people, and he makes the physical human nature of the Messiah, of Jesus, the God-man. Jesus has to have a physical body with physical characteristics, physical inheritance, and he doesn't have, you know, it doesn't just look like he has a body. It's not a cosmic illusion. It's not kind of a, you know, projection of something, or it's not God saying, I can make myself look like a man. He actually is a man. And so, you know, like I always say, if you were going into the coffee shop and he was coming out and you bumped into him, and you said, oh, excuse me, and he'd say, that's okay, you're forgiven. No, he would say, that's okay. You would have run into a real body. You wouldn't have like gone through him or. So the people exist to make that possible. and for God to reveal himself through these people. So say, well, why study the Old Testament? Why care about Israel? Why care about Judaism? Well, it's the foundation of Christianity. It's the foundation of our faith. Even Paul in Romans says, we're the wild olives branch that's grafted into the domestic olive branch. And the roots nourish us. So the roots of Judaism nourish us. So, the prayers we say, the scriptures we read, the beliefs we have, all come from there. And all can be traced back to Abraham. So this is good. And so why did he pick Abraham? He picked him because he wanted to pick him. Why did he pick the Israelites to be the chosen people? Because he wanted to pick them. He could have picked anybody. We could have had a Chinese Messiah. We could have had a, Native American Messiah. We could have had a Northern European Messiah. No, he picked these people because he wants to pick them. And that's the other thing to keep in mind, especially, if you listen to people who are prophetic, if you listen to people who are, specialists in end time events and things, they always talk about America this and America that, and they hold their Bible. See, the Bible's not a book about Americans. It's not a book about Europeans. It's not a book about South America. It's a book about Middle Eastern people. And that's what it's about. So today we're going to get a bunch of people born. So when we... I'm sorry? Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah. Well, God always works with small groups of people. That's why I always talk about remnants. We're a remnant in the world today. God doesn't work with hundreds of millions of people at a time. He can, but he mostly works with little groups, small groups. Sometimes one guy. Yeah. Yes, that's right. All you have to do, if you make yourself available, then he'll equip you to do what he wants you to do. Because the main thing is to make yourself available. I mean, Abram could have said, hey, you know what? Maybe I'm hearing voices, but even if this is really somebody who's talking to me, I'm not moving. I'm not moving from here and going. I got it made over here. I got this nice house. I got a built-in pool. I got a tennis court. I got the best horses, 2 Mercedes. Why would I pack up everything and move to someplace I don't even know where it is? He could have said no. Like when the angel Gabriel appears to Mary and tells her that. I mean, she could have said, you know what? I'm engaged to be married to this guy Joseph. I really love him. He's going to build a house for us. He's got a good business going. And I don't know if I'm seeing things or I don't know if you're real, but I don't think I'm interested. I don't think I want to deal with this. Could have. But of course, God in his foreknowledge knows what's going to happen. But yeah, but in everything, everything points, even our salvation points to God being glorified because we don't save ourselves. We have nothing really. I mean, I don't mean we don't have anything to add because we have a lot to add, but I mean, we don't have anything to add to earning it and saying, hey, you know what? If everybody was more like me, there'd be a lot more people saved. Or, you know what? I've done really good with all these laws. I got to tell you. And compared to that guy over there, I'm way better. That's dangerous talk. Just like we talk about sometimes on Friday night, well, we're in church A. And so, we know everything in church A. We believe everything perfectly. We know the truth perfectly. Now, across the street in church B, those people are totally screwed up. And there's no way the Holy Spirit would ever work in a place like that. Now, church C, well, they're so-so. But in church D, well, you hear people talk like that all the time. And that's dangerous talk because you don't know where the Holy Spirit's working. You don't know. So, when we left off Jacob last time, he was at Bethel and he saw Jacob's ladder. Slept on the rock, he didn't have the My Pillow. So, Bob, you're supposed to laugh. He didn't have My Pillow, so he slept on a rock. Saw angels going up and down on a ladder. And then we related it to John chapter 1 where Jesus tells Nathanael, you're going to see angels ascending and descending on the Son of Man because he's the ladder to heaven. So Jacob is there because he's running away from Esau after he tricked him, Rebekah tricked him, and the old man was mostly blind, old, didn't know what was going on, and then realized he got fooled, but then he couldn't take the blessing back. So now we're going to go to Genesis 29. And we're going to start to see, I don't know what you want to call it, the humanity of these people that are in the Bible. I mean, we've already seen Jacob fooling his father, deceiving his brother, conspiring with his mother, going so far as putting on goat skin so his father thinks he's Esau. When you look at Christian moral teaching, you would say, that's out of bounds. That's out of bounds. But this is Jacob. Now we're going to see lust, desire, more deceit, whatever he's got to do. Fool his uncle, fool anybody he has to fool. And God takes all that and uses it. Now, does God like it when we're deceitful? No. Does he like it when we lie to people? No. But, sometimes because of humanity, because of human nature, he kind of like deals with all that and redeems it in a certain way. And I always think I don't know how many of you have been to Messianic Seders at Passover time, but, the Jews added a lot of traditions to the Passover Seder. And when Jesus sits to do the Last Supper, he not only follows the law of it, he also addresses all these traditions, and then he incorporates it into what he's doing to bring the new covenant. Beautifully done. Beautifully done. Right down to the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper, whatever you call it in your tradition, comes from a children's game that was added to the meal. So Jesus even says, well, this is a children's game, but now this is going to be something different. Now I'm going to tell you, this is my body. It's going to be broken for you. And everybody probably said, what's he talking about? Those guys didn't understand that stuff till after Pentecost. So now we're going to see how Jacob reacts to a beautiful woman who actually is his cousin, a not so beautiful woman who's her sister, so also his cousin, ends up marrying both of them, ends up having a bunch of boys between those two women who are sisters. So I don't know what you call all the relationships of the kids, and then like Sarah did, the plan's not going fast enough, so let's introduce a couple of other women that maybe Jacob can get pregnant so we can get some more boys going here. I mean, we would look at this and say, this is horrible. I mean, if that was a movie, you'd say, oh my gosh, the guy marries two sisters and then he's got two other women and then he's got, people who review movies for morality and stuff, from churches probably would say, don't go see that movie. And it was, I'd probably get up and walk out because it's so weird. But here we go. Let's see. We can't, and like I say, we can't read this verse by verse. So Jacob is heading for Laban's house, who is Rebekah's brother. So this is his uncle. Okay, Laban is his uncle. Let's go 29:9. He's seeing there's a well there, and he's seeing sheep and livestock coming to drink at the well. But somebody start reading at 9. Anybody?
While he was still talking with them, Rachel arrived with her father's sheep, for she was the one who tended them. As soon as Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of his mother's brother Laban, and the sheep of Laban, he went up, rolled a stone away from the mouth of the well, and watered Laban's sheep. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's relative, Rebekah's son. So she ran to tell her father. When Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him. After embracing and kissing him, he brought him to his house. Jacob then refused to Laban all these things. And Laban said to him, "You are indeed my bone and my flesh."
Okay, so let's pause there for a minute. So notice how this emphasizes they're related. Several times it talks about Laban is Rebekah's brother. Rachel comes, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother. Watered the flock of his mother's brother. Kissed Rachel, lifted up his voice and wept. Told Rachel he was her father's relative. He was Rebekah's son. So there's this emphasizing these two are related to each other. They're actually first cousins. Marrying cousins was really not prohibited in those days. Now, marrying more than one woman was frowned on, but not prohibited. I mean, even later, David had a whole bunch of wives. Solomon had 300 wives. A lot of people had 2, 3 wives. Even though, when you read back through Genesis, what does it say? God created them male and female. The man leaves his father and mother, marries his wife, and the two become one flesh. It doesn't say marries whoever he wants to marry, multiple women, and they all become one flesh. It says one and one, and they become one flesh. But these guys were all, and it's a totally male-dominated society. So, if you're King David or if you're King Solomon, all you have to do is say to one of your servants, go get me that woman there. Go over and say, the king wants you. You don't say, hey, listen, I'm not going to go. You go. So here it emphasizes how they're related. Okay, now let's go back. Let's down to start at 15.
Laban said to him, "Should you serve me for nothing just because you are a relative of mine? Tell me what your wages should be." Now Laban had 2 daughters. The older was called Leah, the younger Rachel. Leah had no eye, but Rachel was shapely and beautiful. Because Jacob loved Rachel, he answered, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel." Laban replied, "It is better to give her to you than to another man. Stay with me." Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, yet they seemed to him like a few days because of his love for her.
Okay, so he loves her. Okay, he's willing to work 7 years to marry Rachel. That's what he wants as his wages. Laban says, I don't expect you to work for free. What should your wages be? He said, I want Rachel. Now, why does he want Rachel? Well, she's beautiful. What does it say? She's of beautiful form and appearance. Would your translation say a little different? Well, anyway, she's hot. Yeah. So, so Rachel's beautiful. So it says Leah. It doesn't say she's ugly, like I always say, she's ugly, and then Rachel's beautiful. But it says she has dull eyes, whatever that means. So obviously she's not as attractive as Rachel is. So which one does Jacob want? Yeah, the one who's hot. He wants the one who's beautiful. And so he agrees to work 7 years. And because he's so in love with her and wants her so much, it says the 7 years went by like a few days' time. So 7 years he's working. So then in 21, I'll just read this real quick. Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go into her. And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. Now it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah, his daughter, and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. And Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. So it came to pass in the morning that, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, what is this you've done to me? Was it not for Rachel I served you? Why then have you deceived me? Well, this is pretty weird. So he marries this woman, they sleep together, and he doesn't realize it's not Rachel. That's a little weird. Maybe he had too much to drink at the reception. I don't know. Well, at least these two are laughing. This is good. I mean, I never was able to understand that. Now, a lot of times, the brides were all veiled up and you couldn't see who they were anyway. But then at some point, you're going to say, wait a minute, this is the wrong woman. Or wait a minute, it doesn't sound like Rachel. So you notice when Jacob gets deceived, he doesn't like it. Most people that are deceivers don't like it when they're the ones getting deceived. No matter what it is, whether it's business or friendship or, whatever it is, if you're somebody who's used to lying and deceiving, you hate it when somebody lies to you. You say, hey, wait a minute. You deceived me. See, he doesn't like it. He says, why have you deceived me? And Laban said, it must not be done so in your country to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill her week, and we will give you this one also for the service you will serve with me still another 7 years. Then Jacob did so and fulfilled her week. So he gave him his daughter Rachel as wife as well. And Laban gave his maid Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as a maid. Then Jacob also went into Rachel, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah, and he served with Laban another 7 years. So he worked 14 years to marry these two sisters. That was his wages. So it comes right out and says he loved Rachel more. Now, why does it tell us about these servant girls? I mean, Zilpah and Bilhah, who cares? They probably had all kind of servants. Well, these two women are going to be very important because they're going to contribute to the boys, to the men who become the 12 tribes of Israel. So the 12 tribes, the 12 boys, actually come from 4 women. 1 father, 4 women. So not only the 2 he's married to, which is, questionable enough as it is, but then 2 servant girls. I mean, this is, messy business. Messy business. And so the names of the servant girls are important, and we're going to see here. Um, okay, somebody else start reading at 21. Oh, yeah, no, I'm sorry, 31, 31. Okay, pause. So what's happened here is the Lord, all capital letters. This is God feels bad for Leah because she's unloved, so she conceives first, and has the first boy whose name is Reuben, which means see a son. In Hebrew, it literally means see a son. Kind of like when Eve gave birth to Cain, and she said, "I've produced a man with the help of the Lord." Reuben's name means see a son. So Reuben's important for two reasons. Number one is he's the firstborn of the 12. And number two, he has a sandwich named after him. And I wish if Jordan was here, this would be great. And that you Friday night people aren't allowed to answer. And the reason he has a sandwich named after him is because he opened the first Jewish deli years later. Ooh. This is a tough crowd. Long before Corky and Lenny's, long before Jake's Deli. Yeah. He's the only one of the 12 tribes that has a sandwich named after him. You would never have somebody have a Levi sandwich or a Dan sandwich. So he's the first one born. See a son. Go ahead, Glenn. Okay, pause there. So Simeon, Shimon in Hebrew, and by the way, this is Peter's name. His given name was Simon, Shimon. So this is the second son, means I've been heard. So you see, all their names mean something. So see a son, and I've been heard. So now we got two boys, and they're both from Leah. Go ahead. Okay, so third son, Levi. Now this is going to be a real important son later. All the priests come from Levi. And of course the high priests all come from Levi. Jesus, Yeshua, the eternal high priest, does not come from Levi. But you see Rachel or Leah is saying, now I've given him three sons. Now he's going to love me more. Now he's going to like me better. I've given him three sons. Rachel doesn't have any kids at all yet. So he's going to be more attached to me. And Levi means attached. Now later, God's going to use that because he's going to be attached to Levi's descendants because they're the priests. They're the ones that do the sacrifices, the rituals, the prayers. And of course, in Jesus' time, it gets a little out of whack, but so that he has to criticize them. Somebody said, I don't know if you guys saw this thing that was going around on Facebook. It said some people have trouble with Jesus because they've had bad experiences with religious leaders in the past. And it says Jesus had plenty of trouble with religious leaders, and they ended up killing him. But anyway, so now go ahead. Okay, so the fourth boy is really important as well. because he becomes the ancestor of Jesus, who's the Lion of Judah. Right, that's one of his messianic titles, the Lion of Judah. He's from the tribe of Judah. The writer to the Hebrews says the law given to Moses says nothing about people from Judah being priests, but then Jesus becomes our eternal high priest, even though he comes from the tribe of Judah. And his name in Hebrew is Yehudah, which means praise the Lord. So she has 4 boys. It sounds like pretty rapid succession. So now Jacob's going to like her better because she's produced 4 boys. I mean, and you have to understand, of course, I'm sure you understand that not just ancient times, but even in agricultural places, even in pioneer days, I mean, if you have a bunch of sons, for all the work that has to be done, that's very beneficial. If you've got, a bunch of boys to plow and plant and harvest and stuff, makes your life a lot easier. The women, of course, have to cook and make clothes and have babies and I mean, when you're in a labor-intensive kind of setting, there's not a lot of time to watch TV and relax and stuff. So the more boys you have, the better. So now there's 4 boys, rapid succession. Reuben doesn't really become important except for the sandwich. Shimon, Simon, Simeon, so-so, not really that important. But Levi and Judah both come from Leah. So Jesus' ancestor is Leah of these 2 women, not Rachel. And that's kind of, I think it's, I don't know if it means anything theologically, but I think it's interesting that God feels kind of sorry for Leah because she's, quote, unloved. And so she gives birth to the line of Messiah, whereas Rachel's the beautiful one that he's crazy about. And, she doesn't become the ancestor of the Messiah. So if Jesus would, when Jesus was reading this in the synagogue, he's probably thinking to himself, Leah's my great grandmother. After about 100 greats or whatever it is. So now we got 4 boys. And then, just like, what happens with Sarah and Abraham, in chapter 30, it says, now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said to Jacob, give me children or else I die. And Jacob's anger was aroused against Rachel, and he said, am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? Jacob says, I'm not God. I don't decide who's going to be born. So he actually gets mad at her. So she says, here is my maid Bilhah. Go into her, and she will bear a child on my knees, that I also may have children by her. Now what that means is, I'll give you my servant girl. If you get her pregnant, when she goes into labor, I'm going to have her lay on my lap as the baby's born. So I'm going to be involved, and this baby's going to be my child. This is how desperate Rachel is. Then she gave him Bilhah, her maid, as wife. So I don't know what that means, if they had actually a marriage ceremony, but as wife. And Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, God has judged my case, he has heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore, she called his name Dan. So now we got another boy. And this, of course, is the tribe of Dan. This means judge. God has judged this case, and he's decided to give me a boy. When they go into the land and divide the land up, the land of Dan is way up in the north where the Jordan River starts. It's a very fertile area. It's a very nice, beautiful land. Part of it's in present-day Lebanon. But the Jordan River gets its name because of Dan, because in Hebrew it's Jordan, that means from Dan. So the river comes from the land of Dan. So now we got 5 boys. Rachel doesn't have any of them yet. um, and Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again. Same servant girl. Conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, with great wrestling I have wrestled with my sister, and indeed I have prevailed. So she called his name Naphtali, which means wrestle. My wrestling is what it actually means. Now, she hasn't physically had any children, but she said, I wrestled with my sister and I won. So far the score is Leah 4, Rachel 0, Bilhah 2, and Zilpah 0 so far. Isn't this crazy? I mean, how do you have a home life, sitting around in your family room when you got 2 wives that are sisters, you got 2 servants that you're having relations with, and you're all like one big happy family. Or maybe sometimes not so happy family. Yeah. When Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, she took Zilpah, her maid, and gave her to Jacob as wife. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, a troop comes. So she called his name Gad, which means troop. I'm not sure. I mean, he was only one guy, but maybe she's talking about all of those boys. So now we got, 6 boys already? So now we got Leah 4, Rachel nothing, Bilhah 2, Zilpah 1. Not to say they had a scoreboard at home, but you got to tell Jordan that one. I thought that was pretty good. I mean, isn't this kind of crazy? And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. I am happy for the daughters will call me blessed. So she called his name Asher, which means happy. Asher means happy. So now we got a bunch of boys. They're all descended, of course, from Abraham. So now Abraham's got some serious descendants starting to to show up under bizarre circumstances. Now, it doesn't say, what I always thought was interesting about this was it doesn't say there's any condemnation from God about this. Jacob doesn't hear God say, what you're doing is totally screwed up. You're supposed to be married to one woman, get rid of these servant girls, have them take these boys. Because remember when when Ishmael was, quote, illegitimate, I'll take care of him, but get out of here. They got to get out of here. So now you got all these people, and there's no condemnation that we can tell from the scripture. So then we're going to skip down. Verse 17. And God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a 5th son. I think we got more than that. Leah said, God has given me my wages because I have given my maid to my husband. So she called him Issachar. Issachar means wages. So God's paid me because I gave Jacob, my servant, to have more boys with. So now I got another boy. Issachar comes from Leah. Then Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a 6th son. Oh, I guess her sons, it's counting. And Leah said, God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will dwell with me because I have borne him 6 sons. So she called his name Zebulon, which means dwelling. So now my husband, he's going to really love me now because I gave him 6 boys. So he's going to live with me. Rachel hasn't given him any boys. Now remember, Rachel's her sister, but why should he care about Rachel? He should just care about me. I've given him 6 boys. The tribe of Zebulun ended up settling in the area where Nazareth is. Naphtali is in the area where Capernaum is. And so long after this, the prophet Isaiah, who, as the Friday Night people know, is my favorite major prophet, got his own scroll and everything. Oh boy, is that a tough crowd. You've made the big time as a prophet when you got your own scroll. So Isaiah's got his own scroll. 66 chapters, man. Isaiah says the land of Zebulun and Naphtali live in darkness, and then a light shines on them. So Jesus grows up in Nazareth, which is the area of Zebulun. Then he lives in Capernaum during a lot of his ministry, which is in the tribe of Naphtali. So Isaiah's prophecy is fulfilled just by Jesus living there. So now she's given him 6 boys. Whew. Then afterwards she has a daughter, called her Dinah. It's the first girl that's born. Actually, the only girl that's born to Jacob. And then later we're going to see that some guy from a village takes advantage of Dinah, rapes her basically. And then all the boys get together and they go to this place and just trash the whole town because they want to avenge their sister. So far Leah's had 6 boys and a girl. Then God remembered Rachel. I always like that when it says God remembered something. Like, does that imply he said, oh, gee, I forgot about Rachel. She hasn't had any kids. So God remembered Rachel. God listened to her and opened her womb. And she conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. So she named him Joseph and said, the Lord shall add to me another son. So Joseph, whose name is Yosef, means will add. God will add. Now he becomes famous because he's the reason that the people end up in Egypt. As you know, we're going to go into that in painstaking detail. And we're going to go through a list of things that show Joseph being a prefigurement of Jesus, a prefigurement of the Messiah, by how he lives his life and how he acts and how he rewards his brothers even though they tried to kill him. And the famous statement, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. It says a lot of things, it does a lot of things that prefigure Jesus. The cross was an evil instrument of execution. The people that crucified Jesus meant that for evil, wanted to get him out of the way. But of course, it's the instrument of our salvation. So God meant it for good. So we're going to hear a lot more about Joseph. So then the begetting stops for a little while because Benjamin, who's the last boy, much younger than the other boys, and it doesn't give us ages. It doesn't tell us like how many years go by. But by the time Benjamin's born, the older boys are adults. They're married, but Benjamin's going to be born later, and we'll get to that eventually. But Rachel dies right after Benjamin is born. Tough delivery, and she dies. So she says, I want to name this boy, I forgot what the Hebrew word is, boy, son of sorrow. And she dies. And Jacob says, no, I'm naming him Benjamin, son of my right hand. So little Benjamin becomes son of his right hand. And of course, Jacob is devastated when Rachel dies. So he was, as we see, he gets pretty broken up. So we don't quite have 12 sons yet, but Benjamin's coming along. So they're the 12 boys, and they're on your handouts the meaning of their names. Dinah we'll talk about briefly, but she doesn't really contribute much to the plan of salvation, but we like her anyway. Whew. So now we're not gonna go through all the details of Jacob's going to leave with all his family, and he's going to deceive Laban, and everybody's going to be mad. But we're going to go to chapter 31, and we're going to go down to verse 11. Somebody read. Okay, let's pause there. So now God talks to Jacob again. It doesn't tell us he's heard God talking during all of this. It implies how God has these children being born, but now God speaks with Jacob again and says, I'm the God that you knew at Bethel, that you named House of God, and you knew that I was there, and you were on top of the ladder. So I want you to pack up everybody, and you're going to go back to Canaan, because that's going to be your land. And he says, I'm the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar, and you made a vow to me. So before, he identified himself as the God of Abraham and Isaac. Now he says, I'm the God you talked at Bethel. You talked about at Bethel, and you set up a monument, and you promised you were going to do what I wanted you to do. So now what I want you to do is pack up this messy family of yours and your livestock, and you're going to go back to Canaan. And blesses them with all kind of livestock and stuff. So basically, he packs up, they get all the livestock, and they cross the river. Laban goes running after him because he thinks he stole all his sheep, and, we're not going to get into all that. But then they work it all out. Because Jacob tells him, look, I worked all those years for you. I'm married to 2 of your daughters. You tried to fool me, so don't be such a jerk. But you won't get the don't be such a jerk unless you know the ancient languages. Ooh, Linda's the only one laughing. Where's Jordan? So, we're going to go down to and then Laban realizes he's been blessed by Jacob working there because everything Jacob did for him, he prospered. And then in order to get back to Canaan, he has to go across this land where his brother Esau is living now. And at first he's afraid. But then he sends because, he was going to kill him last time they saw each other, which was at least 21 years earlier, probably more. So he gives Esau a bunch of gifts, gives him like 200 goats and gives him all kind of livestock to shut him up. And then he goes into the land. So I know that's like, kind of too quick of a summary, but you can read all that stuff for your homework. So you can't, we can't read it verse by verse. And again, if you have any Jewish friends, don't tell them how we summarized all that. Because they will spend like 10 years just studying what we just summarized. What kind of goats did he give them? Well, I don't know. Based on this word, it could have been, they were all white goats. No, I think they might have, and they'll debate, what kind of goats were they. And yeah, I mean, for years at a time. But it's kind of funny. We laugh, and I laugh at that. We all laugh at that. But they'll spend so much time debating kind of meaningless things that don't really have a lot of significance, and then they miss the Messiah. Isn't that amazing? They miss like the big picture because they're debating like, well, were they white goats or were they brown goats, or why did he give them 200 goats? Is there any significance to 200 goats? You guys missed the Messiah. Shut up. No, don't say that, because then that will be the end of the discussion. Yeah. When I had this ultra-Orthodox guy, rabbi actually, that I was debating with at the Western Wall in Jerusalem, and we didn't talk about this, but I was telling him about Isaiah 53, and I was telling him about all that stuff. And, he was telling me how, they killed Jesus, they buried him, that was the end of it. All his friends wanted their own religion, so they made this religion out of it, and they said he was God, and blah, 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 blah. But then toward the end of the conversation, he says to me, "Oh, I suppose you're going to tell me he's going to come back." And I said, "He is going to come back." And then he said, "Ha ha, he's not coming back, he's dead. He can't come back, he's dead." I said, "Oh no, he's very much alive." And I said, "When he comes back, you're going to see him, because he's going to come down and his feet are going to break that mountain in half." And then the guy starts screaming at me and he runs away. And I was such in an intense debate with this guy that there were a whole group of men standing around us. I didn't even know they were there. It was pretty hot and heavy for probably 45 minutes, but there was a young man there who, he had a prayer shawl on and, of course, a head covering. And he was walking around saying, "Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus is the Messiah." And they said, "Oh, don't listen to him, he's crazy." And I said, No. I said, he's the only one here who makes any sense, because he's the only one here who understands where the scriptures are going. And then the old man comes back and he starts hitting me in the chest like this with his finger. And I said, "You're touching a Gentile. You might be defiled now." I said, "No, I didn't say that." The guy was mad enough as it was. So he says, "I'm not talking to you anymore because you are an idolater." And I said, "Why am I an idolater?" And he said, "Because you believe a man can be God. And that's idolatry." Then he stormed away and I didn't see him anymore. But it was very intense. We went through a lot of these scriptures, and he was trying to tell me how he keeps the law. And I said, "No, you don't keep the law. Nobody can keep." "Oh, I keep the law. But." So I told him what Jesus said about the Pharisees. Oh, it was wild. It was wild. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Now here's another one of these things that's Melchizedek-like. We're going to go down to, in chapter 32, he's talking about how he goes through Esau's land. He crosses over this little river called Jabbok, which is actually just a little stream. And it sounds like he's just moving with all his stuff. Then somebody start reading verse 24.
After he got them and brought them to
Okay. Now, isn't this weird? Right in the middle of this, we're moving back to the land. We just crossed this little river. We're going to make a camp here. He's wrestling with a man in the middle of the night. Doesn't say where this man came from. Why was he wrestling with him? It just gets injected into here. Isn't that kind of odd? Now, keep in mind what we said about Melchizedek, but look what's happening here. He's left alone, and a man wrestled with him till the breaking of the day. Now, when he saw he could not prevail against him, in other words, the man wasn't winning the wrestling match, he touches Jacob's hip and dislocates his hip by touching it. His hip is out of joint. And he said, the man he's wrestling with, let me go, for the day breaks. Jacob says, I'm not going to let you go till you bless me. Now, it would be pretty weird to be wrestling with a man and say, well, you have to bless me, or else I'm not letting you go. So he asks this man to bless him. The man says to him, what's your name? And he says, Yaakov, Jacob. He says, from now on, you're no longer going to be Yaakov, you're going to be Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. In other words, he's wrestled with God. Jacob said, tell me your name, I pray. And he said, why is it that you ask my name? And he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, which means the face of God. Pani is the word for face. El is the word for God. Peniel is the face of God. For I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. So he wrestles with a man. He says he's seen God face to face. He names the place the face of God. Gets a blessing from this man. And this man changes his name. From Yaakov, the supplanter, to Israel, I've wrestled with God. So because of this wrestling match, Jacob has his name changed, which is a name that still exists, not only in a country, but a whole people that are called Israel, that comes from this wrestling match. So this is another Melchizedek-like man. This is, in some sense, the pre-incarnate Christ. Now, why he couldn't take Jacob in a wrestling match, I think there's some symbolism in there that I haven't figured out yet, and I haven't really read much about that in commentaries about that, but I should have before today. But yes, yes, yes. And this man touches his hip dislocates, and so Jacob limps from then on. And you see at the end of that, it says, the people of Israel still don't eat meat from around the hip of an animal because of this incident that Jacob went through. So this becomes kind of a Christophany like Melchizedek. This is God in some form that's wrestling with Jacob. You know, some of the symbolism is that we always struggle with God, right? We always wrestle with him. You get a sense God wants you to do something, and you say, I don't know if I want to do that. I don't know if I can't do that. I want to do this. Remember before, when Jacob's called, he says, here I am, Hineni, here I am. Now he wrestles, like we wrestle, because we don't know what we're supposed to do, how we're supposed to do it. We don't really want to do it. So we're always in a wrestling match. And then he wants the guy who he's wrestling with to bless him, just like Melchizedek blesses Abraham. Doesn't give him bread and wine this time, but changes his name. And not only does the man he's wrestling with say, "You've wrestled with God," Jacob says, "I've seen the face of God and I've lived." And from then on, he limps. So he has kind of a reminder of the struggle. You have to think about that one for a while. It's, this is just kind of injected into this whole passage. I don't know why it's in that particular place, but what's that? Yes. He says, I've seen his face. It wasn't a hallucination. No, his hip got dislocated. And they couldn't do hip replacements then. This is kind of a different level than the Melchizedek incident. And then later, well, we're not going to see it because it's not in the Torah, but in the book of Joshua, Joshua sees a warrior and says, "Are you on my side or their side?" He says, "Neither, but I'm going to help you," which is kind of a weird thing to say. Gideon, sees this mighty angel who looks like a warrior and says, "I'm going to defeat the Midianites. I'm going to help you." What's that? I don't know. That's why I say it's a very strange passage. hmm hmm Well, it's interesting too that he says, "I've seen God face to face and I've lived." Because remember, God tells Moses, no man can see my glory and live. Because we can't see God how he really is, or else we would just die. Because all our electrical circuits would short circuit. That's why when we go to heaven, our bodies have to be changed. We can't go to heaven with this body because we'd be like, well, you can. We all need to meditate on this. I would like to read some of the ancient commentaries. What the rabbis think this is, or what the ancient Christian fathers thought this was. But anyway, it's a Christophany. So that's session 8.